try with it switched on. I might stand more chance of working. So just I'd like to take you back to 2009, and we moved house. I guess many of you will have been through the same process. So we moved from a 3-bedroomed Victorian townhouse on 4 floors to a bungalow, a 1930s bungalow. We went from long, thin garden to a triangular, large garden, went from 39 steps to 1 step, and we went from 1 shed to 4 sheds. So everything changed. And moving forward a little bit to 2016. So from a work point of view, I work for West Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. In May 2016, we went live with Cerner Millennium. And I must have been the person in the room who was asking all those awkward questions. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? Because I ended up with the responsibility for data migration and integration for the project, obviously in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what we embarked on was migration to Cerner, and we ended up with a very effective solution, I think, and as a result of it, we increased our digital maturity massively and ended up in the fortunate position of being nominated as a GDE, and so we have, really benefited from that whole process. What I'd like to do, though, is just play with that idea of how does data migration compare to some of the things we go through, perhaps moving house. As we were going through the data migration, it felt to me there were some similarities, but I'll leave it up to you to judge, how well it stacks up. So, you may have bought your dream house, and we're not talking here about, well, we are. We're not talking about the process of buying. We know what that's about. Location, location, location. What we're talking about here, though, are the 3 rules of moving house. So that's very much declutter, declutter, declutter. And what the analogy we can perhaps take is, well, decide what the minimum data that you need, and I emphasize need rather than would like, and also focus on improving the data quality before you even embark on the project. So just to look at those in a little bit more detail. So in terms of data migration scope, what data do we need to take? So how much history? Again, we've talked about this a lot today, so I won't dwell on many of these. We chose to take 2 years history. There's a question about, you may think, cancellations. Why would you possibly take cancellations? We'll come on to one of our favourite subjects further on that will perhaps help understand why cancellations might be important. And deceased patients, do we need deceased patients? Do we need to keep activity around those? Clinical data, we certainly heard from UCLH about the challenges of migrating some clinical data. So how can we go about that? And the same with alerts and allergies. We did migrate some alerts, but not allergies. And so the other side, those data quality issues, we were fortunate in having reasonable data NHS number compliance to start with. Addresses, we've heard just how the challenges of addresses, and we suffered with that. How do you map unstructured address data into perhaps more structured address fields, the demands that puts on you. Next of kin data, we found that we had very patchy, very sketchy next of kin data, addresses missing, names not always complete, despite the fact that it's part of our, I guess, like many NHS organisations, it falls under that category of asking people every contact, what's your GP, what's your next of kin, what's your contact details, but still, we manage not to be able to keep it completely up to date. And the same, with emergency contact, with telephone numbers, real challenges in mapping what is pretty basic data but quite difficult to get right. And of course, GP and GP practice as well, constantly changing. We're quite good at keeping up to date through ODS downloads of the latest GP practice data. And in fact, one of our challenges was, sorry, Cerner, one of our challenges was to get the Cerner data to match the sort of GP practice and practice data that we had. So yeah, some data quality issues. But perhaps also, you know, one of the things as you're moving from one house to the other, what furniture we're going to take. It's perhaps a bit of an aside, but recently I had a visit to Papworth Hospital. You know, it's recently moved from its old site to the Cambridge Biomedical Science Park next to Addenbrooke's, and really, really impressive building, circular building. So you walk into this fantastic atrium with a sort of an information desk in the middle, and then round the outside are all the outpatient clinics running. And so there was a suggestion at one stage that they were going to take the chairs from the old hospital to the new hospital, and I could just imagine these, you know, vinyl chairs with little holes in them. Compared to what they actually put in there was the beautiful curved couches, all arranged very neatly round the atrium outside each of these clinic rooms. So you really probably would not want to take your old furniture in that case. So how do the rooms compare, and who will have which bedroom? So perhaps the sort of thing we can look at with that about the data structures. The data structures are going to be massively different. Certainly we were going from a green screen burning platform PAS. Fortunately we had that imperative to get off the platform that I think you referred to earlier, which I think does help massively. How will the data structures map? Really old compared to perhaps something much more fully featured and functional. And what about the workflows? Really important. You know, sometimes I think when we're looking at the data migration part of it, we lose sight of the fact that the workflows are going to be changing, the workflows are changed, and the data migration is only an element to support that change of workflow. And how we're going to handle the reporting requirements. So just again, looking at those in a little bit more detail. So the data structures, in our old PAS, you didn't have to have a referral, you could just make an appointment. New system comes along, no, you've got to have a referral first before you can have your appointment. The whole concept of pathways didn't really exist in our old system, so we had to understand how that was going to fit in. We looked at clinics, and clinics, the concept of a clinic code, again, didn't exist in Cerner. So we had to find a way to take what we know of as our old clinic code into the new constructs in Cerner. And in fact, we did partly helped with that. We preserved our clinic code as part of the work that we did to migrate the data. And all the code mappings that we know about, and the whole concept of an encounter, which again didn't exist for us previously. An encounter is absolutely core to Cerner, and there's so much activity that can be dependent on an encounter, can be cross-encounter, can be you know, independent of any encounter. So it becomes a really fundamental construct in our new world as was. So what can you do if you're perhaps not sure what data to migrate? And certainly for us, when we moved house, we moved into rented accommodation before we moved to our dream bungalow. And so there are things you could do, like using the storage companies that are just everywhere these days. And perhaps that's a bit analogous to also the ability to turn on and off capacity through cloud services as well. So how does that map? So we, again, took a lot of data across from one of the systems that was retiring into our existing document management system. We took all the clinical correspondence from our mini electronic patient record that we had prior to Cerner and put that into our data migration, into our document management system. It took something like 2 million clinical correspondence records, and we could do that well in advance of the data migration as well. But also archive, you know, really key to be able to have access to that data that we needed, and to see the source. Again, we've talked enough about that, I'm sure already. But so who can help? So when you're moving house, yeah, we need all the usual players. I remember again, one of the first house moves that I made was thinking, so I'm paying the estate agents exactly the same as I'm paying these removal guys who actually, you know, really worked hard in really hot conditions, and you just felt it was a bit unfair that they were getting paid the same. But so you could do it yourself. And I have to say, probably, I'm not sure whether it was out of arrogance or naivety, but we probably thought we could do it ourselves. Fortunately, someone along the way managed to persuade us that it was probably best we didn't. And we did go for a data migration specialist. We worked with Stalis, and they were certainly invaluable to us. And again, sorry, Cerner, but I think they knew the migration process better than the Cerner staff did in a lot of cases. But there obviously are ways in which you can use the supplier, but the two together, the supplier knowledge and in this case Stalis's knowledge, was absolutely invaluable. But how can we help ourselves as well? It's not just about, you know, other players in the game. You know, we've got clear making, we need clear decision making authorities, not just myself and my wife, but, you know, DM steering group, a design authority more for those workflow questions. How is the new process going to work? Is everyone on board with that? And DM steering group, absolutely key to help with those decisions, again, that we've talked about already. Someone earlier said about, you know, execs not being interested in data migration, and I think that's absolutely right. The minute you talk to them about it, they just glaze over. But that's not to say they don't support it, and I think that's where we were really fortunate. And probably as a result of going through the project of our EPR implementation, we bridged the gaps with our execs, and we generated a much closer relationship across the organisation. So whilst they're still not interested in data migration, they are supportive in us because we're interested in it and we understand it's important. But we've talked already about the understanding of the data, and I think there's an old adage, isn't there, about getting the people who know it best, getting your experts on the data migration project. Don't you know, use your best staff for it, not people who happen to be available. And obviously supplier expertise as well can be really important as part of the whole process. So we all have, I guess, at some point had the cluttered spare room. So and for us, that translated directly into RTT. So what are we going to do about RTT? Referral to treatment time, 18 weeks. You all know and love it, I'm sure. And that proved a huge challenge for us. I'm sure Kate's still got the scars from it. But we recognised that for RTT data, there was actually 3 different ways we needed to deal with it. There's future activity that had either an open or a closed pathway, so we had to migrate that one way. There were open pathways where there was no future activity still in the system, and we had to use another method for that. And then there was historic activity that may have been included in an open pathway. So we had to, and again, this was something that perhaps wasn't clear how we were going to do it when we set out on it. So we had to find different solutions for each of those. And we, yeah, that was one of our biggest challenges by a long way. So yeah, how's this analogy working? Does it hold up okay? Let's have a look. So trial loads, we've talked about trial loads. We were contracted for 3 trial loads. We ended up taking 4 trial loads, and the project was inevitably delayed. Again, not from any concerns about the data migration particularly, but other delays that we met on the way. So if the analogy with moving house is possibly a closer analogy, will be move all your furniture before the move date and then throw it away. So maybe that doesn't quite stack up. What about this concept of bulk and delta? So bulk load, taking all the data you can well in advance, and then that final load that takes any differences that happen since you took that big load. So I think moving the big items in advance of the move date, if you can get your solicitors to agree access to the house before you can get in, great. I think that does work. Out of slot reports. So we worked, it was one of our really big challenges. We worked really hard to make sure that when we migrated appointments, we didn't lose any appointments. And I think we were one of the first trusts to get 0 out of slots for our choose and book migration. So we were really pleased with that. We recognise that the clinical risks of missing just a single appointment are huge. So it's something we paid real attention to. So yeah, the list of all the things that aren't going to fit, well, we don't really know that. How do we know that on our house move? Data reconciliation, some sort of ability to count the data before we move the data, count it when we receive it on the target system, and yeah, sure enough, yeah, we can probably do that. Count the boxes as they leave the house, as they go onto the lorry, as they come off the lorry into the new house. We can do that. So that's fair enough. And data quality reports and mismatched mappings. Something that we've talked about, the ability to iterate around that many times is so valuable. And that mismatched mappings, you probably won't have a clear list of where all your items are and what the new location is going to be for those items. So no, I don't think that quite works either. So where are we today then? Just fast forwarding to 10 years on. So yeah, I can confirm, you'll be pleased to know, all the boxes are unpacked. The process of decluttering still ongoing, closely supervised by Mrs. McLaughlin. She's the tidy one. I'm the hoarder. So yeah, that's going well. We are up to 6 sheds now. You'll be pleased to know. From a data migration point of view, the pains has receded a little bit. But I think it's fair to say it's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. Certainly the decluttering is continuing. We are still revisiting 3 years on, 3.5 years on, some of the data that we didn't migrate to see if we can now look at it. And with the use of some of the RPA tools that we've seen, we are being able to address some of that more difficult to get at data, and that's still in process. So I think, in summary, really, I'd just like to finish with that one thought. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And I'd be interested to see if you think the analogy stacks up.